My name is Alara Vance. I'm 31 years old. And last Saturday, at my own sister's wedding, my mother slapped me across the face in front of a room full of people. The sound of it, a sharp, ugly crack that seemed to silence the entire bridal suite, was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was louder than the pop of the champagne corks, louder than the nervous laughter of the bridesmaids, and certainly louder than the quiet, steady beat of my own heart breaking. The slap wasn't just about the sting on my cheek or the five-fingered print that I knew was already blooming there. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being seen not as a daughter, but as a resource, a utility, a solution to a problem they created. And the problem, the one that had been simmering for weeks and finally boiled over in that moment of violence, was my penthouse, my home, the one I had bled for, sacrificed for, and built for myself, brick by digital brick, in a city 1,000 miles away from them. They didn't just want to borrow it. They demanded it, as if it were their right, an extension of their own assets they had simply forgotten to list. When I finally found my voice and said no, that's when it happened. That's when my mother's love, or what I had always mistaken for love, showed its true face. It was the face of rage, and as I stood there, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth from where my tooth cut my lip, I had a moment of horrifying clarity. They didn't see me. They had never seen me. They only saw what I had, and what they believed they were owed. Before I tell you how a wedding, meant to be the happiest day of my sister's life, became the day I finally divorced my own family, I need you to understand how we got here. It's a long road, paved with small dismissals and quiet sacrifices that built up over 30 years into a mountain of resentment I hadn't even realized I was climbing. My life is a testament to the American dream they always preached, but never thought I, the quiet, nerdy daughter, would be the one to achieve. I'm a data architect. It's a job title that makes my parents' eyes glaze over at family dinners. It's not a doctor, not a lawyer, not something they can easily brag about to their friends at the country club in Dallas. It's just computers. To them, I disappeared into the anonymous ether of the tech world in Seattle and emerged, inexplicably, with a level of success that baffled and, I now realize, infuriated them. My sister, Chloe, is 2 years younger. She is, and always has been, the sun around which our family orbits. She's beautiful, charming, and has a talent for making everyone feel like they are the most important person in the room, right before she asks them for a favor. She followed the path our parents laid out for her. She went to a prestigious Southern university, joined the right sorority, and got a degree in communications that led to a PR job at a high-end fashion label, a job my father's connections secured for her. Her life has been a series of perfectly curated stepping stones, each one placed for her by our parents. My life was different. I was the one who hid in my room with programming books, who won state-level math competitions that earned a polite, distracted nod before the conversation shifted back to Chloe's latest formal. I put myself through grad school at Stanford, with a combination of scholarships and waiting tables, a fact my parents conveniently omit when telling my story, preferring the narrative that I simply got lucky in the tech boom. The ultimate symbol of this luck is my penthouse. It sits on the 40th floor of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, with a panoramic view that sweeps from the Space Needle to the snow-capped peak of Mount Rainier. It's my sanctuary. The floors are polished concrete. The furniture is minimalist and modern, and every single object, from the $1,000 espresso machine to the original abstract art on the walls, was chosen by me and paid for with money I earned during 80-hour work weeks, fueled by caffeine and a relentless desire to build a life so secure, so completely my own, that no one could ever make me feel small again. It's more than an apartment. It's a fortress. It is the physical manifestation of my independence, the one place on earth where I am not Chloe's responsible older sister, or Richard and Eleanor's quiet daughter, but simply Alara, the architect of my own life. So when my mother called me 2 months ago, her voice dripping with that syrupy sweetness she only uses when she wants something significant, I should have known. It started innocently enough. "Lara, darling," she began, "we have the most wonderful news. Liam's family is flying in from London for the wedding." Liam is Chloe's fiancé, a perfectly nice investment banker from a family with a title and an estate in the English countryside. For my parents, this marriage wasn't just a union of two people. It was a merger of social dynasties. "That's amazing, Mom," I said, genuinely happy for my sister. "But the hotel we blocked for the guests. It's lovely, but it's not, you know, suitable for the Earl and his wife," she continued. "They're used to a certain standard, darling. We can't have them in a regular hotel room." I could feel the trap being set. "So," she said, her voice bright with feigned inspiration, "we had the most brilliant idea. They could stay with you." I paused, the gears in my mind grinding to a halt. "Stay with me? In Seattle?" "Mom, the wedding is in Dallas." There was a short, sharp laugh on the other end. "Oh, silly. Not for the wedding itself. But they want to make a trip of it, see the States?" And we thought, what better way to show them American hospitality than to have them stay in your magnificent penthouse for the 2 weeks leading up to the wedding? It'll be our gift to them. A home away from home. I stared out my floor-to-ceiling window at the city lights twinkling below. My home. A gift. From them. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted to give away my home, my sanctuary, to complete strangers to impress their new in-laws. They weren't asking. They were informing me of a decision they had already made on my behalf. That was the first crack in the foundation. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning. A prelude to a demand so outrageous it would force me to choose between the life I had built and the family I thought I loved. If you've ever felt like your own family sees you as a means to an end, if you've ever had to fight for your own space, then you know the impossible position I was in. This is the story of how I stopped fighting for their approval and started fighting for myself. If you want to hear how it all unfolded, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because the story I'm about to tell you might just change the way you look at your own family forever. To truly understand why my mother's hand connected with my face in that bridal suite, you have to understand the landscape of my childhood. It wasn't a place of overt cruelty. There were no monsters hiding in closets. The monster in my story was far more subtle. It was a ghost called invisibility. I grew up in a beautiful home in Highland Park, Dallas. It was a place of manicured lawns and unspoken expectations. My father, Richard Vance, is a man who measures worth in stock prices and social connections. My mother, Eleanor, measures it in appearances and favorable comparisons. And from the moment Chloe was born, a bubbly, blonde-haired angel, I became the control group in their grand experiment of parenthood. Chloe was the success story. I was the baseline. I remember my 10th birthday. I had asked for one thing: a telescope. I was obsessed with astronomy, devouring books about nebulae and distant galaxies. I imagined spending my nights on the back patio, charting the stars. When I woke up that morning, there was a large, beautifully wrapped box waiting for me. But inside wasn't a telescope. It was a dollhouse, an elaborate 3-story Victorian mansion, complete with tiny porcelain dolls. It was the exact dollhouse Chloe had been pointing at in a catalog for weeks. My mother smiled. A bright, brittle thing. "We thought you'd outgrown that silly star phase, darling. This is much more appropriate." I remember the weight of the disappointment, so heavy it felt hard to breathe. I thanked them, of course. I was a good daughter. Later that day, my father took us out. As we passed a toy store, Chloe pointed to a smaller, less expensive telescope in the window and said, "Look, that's what Lara wanted." My father glanced at it, then at me, and said, "Well, the dollhouse was a better investment." He wasn't being mean. He was just being himself. He genuinely believed a dollhouse, a symbol of domesticity and tradition, was a more valuable asset for a daughter than a tool for exploring the universe. That was the day I learned. My passions were silly phases, and my value was determined by their investments in me. This pattern repeated itself endlessly. When I was 16, I won the Texas State Science Fair for developing a rudimentary data compression algorithm. The prize was a $5,000 scholarship and a trip to the national competition in D.C. I came home, clutching the oversized check and the blue ribbon, my heart thrumming with a pride so fierce it felt like it would burst. I found my parents in the kitchen, huddled over fabric swatches. Chloe, then 14, had just been named to the homecoming court, and the debate over the color of her dress, periwinkle or cornflower blue, had consumed the household for a week. I cleared my throat. "I won," I said, my voice sounding small in the suddenly quiet room. My mother looked up, her eyes taking a second to focus on me. "Oh, that's lovely, dear. The science thing?" My father glanced at the check. 5,000? Good for you. That'll cover your car insurance for a couple of years. And just like that, the conversation pivoted back to Chloe. "We're thinking periwinkle, Lara. What do you think?" It brings out the blue in her eyes. My greatest academic achievement to that point was worth less than 5 minutes of their attention. The scholarship wasn't a celebration of my intellect. It was a practical solution to a line item on their budget. Meanwhile, Chloe's life was a parade of triumphs that we were all required to attend. We sat through every one of her dance recitals, where she was always front and center. We applauded every one of her cheerleading competitions. When she was elected prom queen, my parents threw a party that cost more than my first car. They framed the photo of her with the crown and placed it on the grand piano in the living room. My science fair trophy was relegated to a shelf in my bedroom, behind a stack of books. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I think, in their own way, they did. But their love was conditional, transactional. I was the responsible one, the self-sufficient one. They never had to worry about me, so they simply didn't. I was a fixed asset, reliable and low maintenance, while Chloe was a dynamic venture that required constant capital and attention. This dynamic solidified when it came to money. When I went to Stanford for my master's, I told them I had it covered. The truth was, my scholarships and savings from my part-time job weren't enough. I took out student loans without telling them because I knew asking for help was futile. I remember one frantic call home during my first semester. My laptop had died right before finals week. I had $20 in my bank account. I swallowed my pride and called my dad. "Dad," I started, my voice shaking. "I'm in a bit of a bind. My computer just crashed and I have 3 final papers due." Before I could even ask, he sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Alara, I just wired Chloe $500 for a sorority ski trip." "Your timing is terrible." I could hear my mom in the background. "Tell her to go to the library." I hung up, went to the campus library, and spent the next 72 hours awake, writing my papers on a public computer that logged me out every 60 minutes. I got A's on all of them. The next week, I saw pictures on Chloe's Facebook of her and her friends in matching designer ski gear in Aspen. The caption read, "Besties in the snow. Text Daddy for making it happen, number blessed." I never asked for money again. I took on an extra job. I ate ramen noodles and lived in a tiny room I shared with 2 other students. That experience forged something in me, a core of steel. It taught me that the only person I could ever truly rely on was myself. So, when I graduated and landed my first 6-figure job at a tech startup in Seattle, I didn't call home to celebrate. I opened a high-yield savings account. Every promotion, every bonus, every stock option that vested went into that account. I lived like a student for 5 more years, pouring every spare dollar into investments and savings. I wasn't just building wealth. I was building a wall. A wall so high and so strong that I would never, ever have to be in a position of asking them for anything again. The Penthouse was the final, gleaming turret on that wall. It was my declaration of independence. So when my mother called, casually offering up my fortress as a luxury bed and breakfast for her new in-laws, it wasn't just an inconvenient request. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and everything I had worked for. They hadn't been there for the struggle, but they felt entitled to the spoils. They saw the penthouse not as the result of my sacrifice and intellect, but as a family asset they had the right to manage. They saw a resource, a shiny object they could use to enhance their own status. They didn't see the nights I spent crying in the library. They didn't see the ramen noodle dinners. They didn't see the girl with the telescope, dreaming of worlds far, far away. And their blindness to my past was about to cause a collision with my present, so catastrophic that none of us would ever be the same. The initial phone call with my mother about Liam's parents staying at my penthouse was just the opening salvo. I tried to deflect gracefully, to set a boundary without starting a war. "Mom, I'd love to help, but that's just not going to be possible," I said, keeping my voice even and calm. "My work schedule is insane leading up to the end of the quarter, and I have a major project launching. I really can't have house guests for 2 weeks, especially ones I've never met. It's just too much disruption." I thought this was a perfectly reasonable adult explanation. It was also the truth. I was leading a team on a critical infrastructure overhaul for a multi-billion-dollar client, and the idea of entertaining strangers, no matter how titled, was a nightmare. There was a chilling silence on the other end of the line. It was the kind of silence my mother deployed as a weapon, designed to make you squirm, to make you backtrack and apologize for a crime you didn't commit. "Disruption?" she finally said, her voice laced with ice. "Alara, this is family. This is the Earl of Northwood and his wife. This isn't your college roommate asking to crash on the couch. This is about making a good impression. For Chloe. For all of us." The phrase, "for all of us," was the key. In my family, my achievements were only valuable if they could be leveraged for the collective good, with the definition of good being anything that made them look better. "I understand that," I said, my grip tightening on my phone. "And I'm happy to contribute. I've already told Chloe I'll cover the cost of the string quartet for the ceremony. And I can book Liam's parents a suite at the Four Seasons downtown. My treat. It'll be far more comfortable for them anyway. They'll have room service, a concierge." "We are not putting the Earl in a hotel," she snapped, her voice losing its polite veneer. "That's so impersonal, so American. Chloe wants this to feel intimate, like family embracing them. Your penthouse is perfect. It's a statement piece. It shows them that our family is of a certain caliber. A statement piece. My home, my life's work, reduced to a prop in their social theater." The frustration was a hot coil in my stomach. "Mom, my answer is no. I'm sorry if that's disappointing, but my home is not available. The offer for the hotel suite stands." I heard her take a sharp, theatrical breath. "I see," she said, her voice dripping with martyrdom. "I see how at Island you go off and make your fortune, and suddenly you're too important for your own family. Too good for us. I'll have to call Chloe and tell her. She's going to be devastated. Absolutely devastated." She was so excited to tell Liam's parents about her brilliant sister's stunning home. And then, the click. She hung up on me. I stood in my kitchen, the silence of my apartment feeling suddenly oppressive. I knew what would happen next. My mother would call Chloe and frame my refusal as a personal slight, an act of selfish betrayal against her sister on the eve of her wedding. And right on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo. Chloe, in a wedding dress at a fitting-looking radiant. The text below, from my mother, was simple and brutal. "This is the beautiful bride you're choosing to disrupt. I hope you're proud of yourself." It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple, and they were masters of the art. I immediately called my best friend, Marcus. Marcus and I had met in the trenches of our first startup job. He was a brilliant software engineer with a cynical sense of humor and an uncanny ability to see through corporate and personal BS. He was the only person in my life who knew the full, unedited story of my family. I explained the situation, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and anxiety. He listened patiently, letting me vent for a full 10 minutes. When I finished, his response was blunt. Lara, this is not a request. This is a hostile takeover attempt of your apartment. And you know this isn't the real play, right? This is a test. A test of what? I asked. A test of your boundaries. For your entire life, you've been the path of least resistance. You're the responsible one. The one who cleans up messes. The one who never asks for anything. You just quietly get things done. They are not used to you having a spine of steel. They're used to you having a spine made of velvet. They're pushing right now to see if you'll fold. If you give them the penthouse, what's next? A loan for Chloe and Liam's down payment on a mansion? Co-signing on my father's risky business venture? He was right. I knew he was right. Every time I had ever set a small boundary, they had bulldozed it. This wasn't about a place for Liam's parents to stay. This was about control. This was about reminding me that, no matter how successful I became, my resources were ultimately theirs to command. A few hours later, my father called. His approach was different. No emotional manipulation, just cold, hard business logic, or his version of it. Alara, he began, his voice stern and paternal. Your mother told me about your hesitation. I need you to understand the strategic importance of this. Liam's father isn't just an earl. He's a major player in international finance. Having him in our debt, feeling a sense of familial obligation to us, could open doors for my business that you can't even imagine. This isn't a favor. It's an investment in this family's future. Your future included. My future is in Seattle, Dad. My career is here. And it has nothing to do with your business or impressing British aristocracy, I countered, feeling a new surge of resolve. And my home is not a bargaining chip, he sighed, the sound crackling with impatience. You've always been naive about how the world really works. It's all about leverage. You have an asset that we need to leverage right now for the good of the family. Don't be selfish. Your sister's happiness is on the line. The family's reputation is on the line. Are you really going to put your own comfort above all that? We need the keys, Alara. FedEx them tomorrow. I'll expect them by Friday. It was an order. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He spoke with the calm, unshakable authority of a man who had never been told no by his children. No, I said, the word feeling, both terrifying and liberating. I will not be sending you my keys. I'll be in Dallas the week of the wedding. We can discuss it then. There's nothing to discuss, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. Think very carefully about this, Alara. Very carefully. He hung up. The battle lines had been drawn. It was me against my entire family. They had escalated from a manipulative request to an outright demand, cloaked in the language of familial duty and strategic investment. They had made it clear that my refusal was not just an inconvenience. It was an act of betrayal. And as I booked my flight to Dallas for the wedding, I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. I was walking into the lion's den. I had spent a decade building a fortress to protect myself, but I was about to find out that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones you willingly let through the front gate. Flying into Dallas felt like descending into enemy territory. The week leading up to the wedding was a masterclass in psychological warfare, orchestrated by my parents with my sister Chloe as the willing and often weeping centerpiece. I had booked a room at the Melrose, a beautiful historic hotel, wanting a neutral space to retreat to. The first sign that this would be a mistake was the text I received from my mother the moment I landed. A hotel? Really, Alara? Like you're some stranger visiting for a conference? Your childhood bedroom is waiting for you. It was a guilt trip wrapped in an accusation. By choosing to stay at a hotel, I was already signaling my disloyalty. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Dallas Country Club, a place where my family had been members for decades. It was a sea of pastel linen, old money, and whispered judgments. From the moment I walked in, I was treated with a sort of cautious curiosity. It was clear my parents had been spreading their version of the story. Aunts and uncles gave me tight, pitying hugs. We've been so worried about you, darling, my Aunt Carol murmured, patting my arm. Working so hard all alone in that big city. You mustn't forget about your family. It was a warning disguised as concern. I tried to focus on Chloe. She looked stunning in a white cocktail dress, her fiancé Liam at her side. Liam was a genuinely kind man, with a gentle British accent and eyes that seemed a little overwhelmed by the Texan opulence of it all. He greeted me with a warm hug. Alara, so good to see you. Chloe has told me so much about you. We're so thrilled you could make it. I wondered exactly what Chloe had told him. Judging by the strained look she gave me over his shoulder, it probably wasn't flattering. The passive-aggressive campaign began during dinner. We were seated at a large table with my parents, Chloe, Liam, and Liam's parents, the Earl and Countess of Northwood, Charles and Isabel. They were exactly as you'd imagine, impeccably dressed, polite, and exuding an air of quiet, ancient authority. My mother, of course, steered the conversation directly toward the landmine. Isabel, we were so hoping to give you and Charles a truly authentic American experience, she began, her voice full of theatrical regret. My daughter Alara has the most breathtaking penthouse in Seattle. We had planned for you to stay there, as our personal guests. The views are simply, well, you can see the entire world from her living room, can't you, Alara? All eyes turned to me. I felt my face flush. It was a brilliant, vicious move. She had put me on the spot, forcing me to either lie and agree, or publicly contradict her and appear inhospitable. I chose a third option. I smiled warmly at Isabel. My mother is a wonderful hostess, but she's also a terrible keeper of my work schedule, I said, my voice light and pleasant. Unfortunately, my home is a complete disaster zone, with a massive project launch. You would have been tripping over blueprints and sleeping on server racks. I promise you, the Four Seasons is a significant upgrade. Isabel smiled graciously. My dear, please don't give it a second thought. A hotel is perfectly fine. I can't imagine imposing on you during such a busy time. My mother's smile tightened at the edges. I had parried her attack, but I knew it was only a temporary victory. Later in the evening, Chloe pulled me aside near the bar. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching a glass of champagne so tightly her knuckles were white. How could you do this to me? She whispered, her voice thick with tears. Do what, Chloe? Book your future in-laws a 5-star hotel suite? You embarrassed Mom. You embarrassed me. You made it sound like we were lying. You were lying, I said, keeping my voice low. You told them they could have my apartment without ever asking me. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to be my sister, she hissed. I expected you, for once in your life, to think about someone other than yourself and your precious career. This is my wedding. It's supposed to be perfect. Liam's parents think we're some backwater Texans, and your apartment was the one thing that could have impressed them, that could have shown them we're on their level. The raw, ugly truth of it hung in the air between us. My home, my success, was nothing more than a status symbol to her. It wasn't about hospitality. It was about insecurity. It was about her desperate need to measure up to Liam's aristocratic family, and she saw my penthouse as the perfect yardstick. My life is not a prop for your wedding, Chloe, I said, my voice colder than I intended. And if your relationship with Liam's family is so fragile that it depends on the view from my living room, then you have much bigger problems than this. I walked away before she could respond, my heart pounding. The lines were being drawn thicker and darker. The next day was the bridal luncheon. The theme was Southern Belles and Mimosas. It was a nightmare of floral prints and forced cheerfulness. This time the attack was a group effort. My mother, my aunt, and several of her close friends cornered me by the dessert table. Ilera, darling, one of them, a woman named Bitsy, began. We were just saying it's such a shame that you've become so career-focused. A beautiful girl like you. All that money and no one to share that big, empty apartment with. It must be so lonely. It was a classic tactic. Dismiss my professional success and reframe it as a personal failure. My mother chimed in. Oh, she has her work. Her work is very important to her. More important than anything, it seems. The implication was clear. I was cold. I was selfish. I was a loveless career woman who had forgotten the importance of family. They were building a narrative, not just for themselves, but for the entire social circle. They were preemptively justifying their anger and my sister's disappointment. They were painting me as the villain of the story so that when the inevitable explosion happened, everyone would know who to blame. I spent the rest of the luncheon smiling, making polite conversation, and feeling like I was suffocating. I was an alien in my own family, speaking a language of boundaries and self-respect that they refused to understand. Their language was one of obligation, appearance, and entitlement. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that these little skirmishes were just the prelude. The final battle would be fought on Chloe's wedding day, and they had no intention of taking any prisoners. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and painfully clear, a perfect Texas sky that felt like a mockery of the storm brewing inside the bridal suite of the opulent hotel my parents had booked. The room was a chaotic symphony of hairspray, nervous energy, and the scent of wilting peonies. Chloe was a vision of anxiety in her silk robe, surrounded by a flock of fawning bridesmaids. My mother was the conductor of this orchestra, directing traffic, issuing orders, and casting pointed, icy glances in my direction every few minutes. I had tried to be helpful, fetching coffee, steaming a bridesmaid's dress, but I was treated like a ghost at the feast, an unwelcome presence they were all trying to ignore. The final confrontation wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, deliberate ignition. It started, as most of my family's conflicts did, with something small and entirely unrelated. The florist had delivered the bouquets, and Chloe's, a cascading arrangement of white roses and orchids, was missing the tiny, vintage locket she had planned to wrap around the stems. It was a family heirloom, and its absence sent Chloe into a full-blown panic. "It's gone! It's ruined!" she wailed, tears threatening her $1 million makeup job. "The entire wedding is ruined!" And my mother rushed to her side, cooing and soothing her. "It's all right, darling, we'll find it. Someone probably just misplaced it." They searched everywhere, turning the suite upside down, their panic escalating with every passing minute. It was, objectively, a minor mishap. But in the pressure cooker of the day, it became a catastrophe. And like every catastrophe in our family, a scapegoat was needed. After 15 minutes of fruitless searching, my mother straightened up, her face a mask of grim resolution. She turned and locked her eyes on me, where I was standing quietly by the window, trying to stay out of the way. "This is your fault," she said, her voice low and venomous. The room fell silent. Even Chloe stopped crying, her head snapping up to look at me. "My fault?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How is this possibly my fault?" "This energy," my mother said, gesturing vaguely around the chaotic room. "This negativity. You brought it in here with you yesterday. All your selfishness and your stubbornness. You've put a dark cloud over this entire celebration because you couldn't do one simple thing for your sister. Chloe is a nervous wreck because she feels like her own sister doesn't support her." It was the most absurd, twisted piece of logic I had ever heard, but I saw the other women in the room nodding in agreement. The narrative had been set. I was the problem. "Mom, that's insane," I said, finding my footing. "This has nothing to do with me. It's a lost locket." "It has everything to do with you," she shot back, taking a step toward me. "If you had just said yes, if you had just been a decent sister and a good daughter, we would all be relaxed and happy right now. Liam's parents would be comfortably settled in your penthouse instead of a stuffy hotel. Chloe would be glowing, and this wedding would be the perfect, joyful event it was meant to be. But you couldn't do it. You had to make it all about you, your needs, Your home. Your precious boundaries. Chloe, seeing her opening, joined the attack. She's right, Laura. I can't stop thinking about how you've humiliated us. How am I supposed to walk down the aisle and pretend to be happy when I know my own sister cares more about her stupid apartment than my marriage? This was it. The final, desperate, and utterly shameless play. They were using a lost locket as leverage to get my keys. They were trying to weaponize my guilt in the final hours before the ceremony. I looked at my sister, at her beautiful, tear-streaked face, and I didn't feel guilt. I felt a profound, bottomless sadness. And then I felt anger. A cold, clear anger that burned away all the years of trying to please them. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through their hysteria. Stop it, both of you. This is not about a locket, and it is not about my support for your marriage, Chloe. This is about your absurd, entitled demand for my home. A home I worked for, a home I paid for, a home you have no right to. The answer was no 2 months ago, and it's no now. I will not be bullied and emotionally blackmailed into giving you my keys. The conversation is over. My mother's face went pale, then a dark, mottled red. Her eyes, usually so controlled and calculating, were wide with a fury I had never seen before. She saw that she was losing. Her manipulations, her guilt trips, her carefully constructed narrative, none of it was working. I was not folding. The velvet spine had finally turned to steel, and she couldn't stand it. You ungrateful little... She started, her voice shaking with rage. She strode toward me, her hand raised. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I honestly didn't believe she would do it. Not my mother, the queen of icy composure and passive aggression. Physical violence was so messy, so common, but she did. Her hand sliced through the air and connected with my cheek with a sickening crack. The force of it snapped my head to the side. For a split second, there was no sound at all, just the deafening roar of blood in my ears and the white-hot sting on my skin. The world seemed to tilt, the edges blurring. I slowly turned my head back to face her. The bridal suite was frozen in a tableau of shock. The bridesmaids' mouths were hanging open. The hairstylist stood with a can of hairspray held aloft, paralyzed. Chloe stared, her own drama completely forgotten in the face of this new, horrifying one. And my mother? My mother looked as shocked as anyone, her hand still hovering in the air, her face a mixture of disbelief and a dawning terrible horror at what she had just done. I raised my fingers to my cheek, which was already beginning to throb. I could feel the shape of her hand, a burning imprint on my skin. I looked from my mother's shocked face to my sister's, and in that moment, something inside me shifted forever. It wasn't just a slap. It was a severance. It was the sound of a cord, stretched thin over 31 years of neglect and expectation, finally snapping. And as I stood there in the wreckage of my sister's wedding morning, a cold, calm certainty settled over me. They had started this war, but I was going to be the one to finish it. The slap echoed in the silence of the bridal suite, a definitive, irreversible act. The immediate aftermath was a blur of motion and sound that seemed to happen in slow motion. One of the bridesmaids gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." My mother quickly retracted her hand as if she'd been burned, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions, fury, shock, and the first creeping tendrils of regret. But it wasn't the kind of regret that comes from empathy. It was the regret of someone who has made a tactical error, who has lost control and shown their hand in the ugliest way possible. Chloe rushed forward, but not to me. She went to our mother. "Mom, what did you do?" she cried, though her tone was less accusatory and more panicked, like a child who had just seen her parent reveal a terrifying new side. My mother just stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She pushed me to it, she stammered, already starting to rewrite the narrative in her head. You all heard her, her disrespect, her tone. I didn't say a word. I turned, walked past the stunned faces of the bridesmaids, picked up my purse from the chair where I'd left it, and walked out of the room. I didn't run. I didn't cry. My movements were deliberate, almost robotic. The long walk down the hotel corridor felt like a mile. I could feel their eyes on my back. I knew they were expecting me to break down, to come running back, to apologize for forcing my mother to hit me. That's how it had always worked. I was the one who was supposed to absorb the conflict, to smooth things over, to manage their emotions. But the girl who did that was gone. She had died in that suite, at the end of her mother's hand. Once inside the elevator, the doors sliding shut to grant me a moment of privacy, I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My cheek was on fire. I looked at my reflection in the polished brass walls. A faint red handprint was already visible, a brand of my family's dysfunction. And in my own eyes, I didn't see pain. I saw a chilling, unfamiliar clarity. The fog of obligation, of hope, of filial duty had been burned away. I saw everything for exactly what it was. Back in the sanctuary of my own hotel room, I locked the door and leaned against it, my legs finally starting to shake. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a deep, seismic tremor of grief and rage. I called the one person I knew would understand. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Hey, it's wedding day. Shouldn't you be fluffing a veil or something?" he asked cheerfully. "She hit me," I said, my voice flat and empty. "My mother slapped me." The line went silent for a moment. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. "Are you safe?" "I'm in my hotel room. I'm okay. Physically." I sank onto the edge of the bed and recounted the entire scene, the words tumbling out of me in a torrent. Marcus listened without interrupting, a steady, calming presence on the other end of the line. When I finished, he said something I'll never forget. "Okay, so that's the end of the negotiation. That's the end of the discussion. This is no longer a family dispute, Laura. This was an assault. And it was the final confirmation of everything we've ever talked about. They don't see you as a person. They see you as an obstacle to what they want." "What do I do, Marcus?" I whispered. "I'm supposed to be in the wedding. I'm the maid of honor. The ceremony is in 3 hours. "No," he said firmly, "you're not. You are not going to stand up next to your sister and pretend that this is okay. You are not going to put on a pretty dress and smile for pictures with the woman who just assaulted you. You have 2 choices. You can pack your bag, go to the airport, and fly back to Seattle. Ghost them completely. Or you can stay and end this on your own terms." My phone started buzzing. A text from Chloe. "Laura, come back. Mom is a mess. She didn't mean it. You know how stressed she gets. Please don't ruin my wedding day." The gaslighting had begun. My mother's violence was being reframed as a symptom of her stress, and my reaction to it was positioned as the thing that would ruin the wedding. Not the slap itself, but my refusal to pretend it didn't happen. Then, a text from my father. "Alara, your mother is very upset. I think you owe her an apology for your provocative behavior. We expect to see you at the church. Don't make a scene." An apology. They wanted me to apologize. The sheer, blinding arrogance of it was what solidified my decision. I wasn't going to run. I had been running my whole life. Running to achieve, running to build a wall around myself. Marcus was right. It was time to end this on my terms. And suddenly I knew exactly how. I had one very powerful piece of leverage, a card I hadn't even considered playing until now. It was something I had done out of a genuine, if misguided, sense of love and familial duty. A few months ago, when my father had mentioned that the wedding costs were spiraling out of control, I had done what I always did. I had stepped in to be the responsible one. I had quietly, without any fanfare, offered to pay for the most expensive parts of the reception. The venue rental at the Historic Art Museum, the 5-course dinner from the celebrity chef, and the open bar. It was a sum well into the 6 figures, a cost I had absorbed without flinching because I wanted my sister to have a beautiful day and I wanted to ease my parents' burden. I had signed the contracts. The final payment installment was due to the vendors, via a check from my account, by 10 p.m. tonight, during the reception. They had forgotten about that. In their campaign to seize my penthouse, they had completely forgotten about the enormous financial gift I had already given them. They saw me as ungrateful and selfish, while literally planning to celebrate in a ballroom paid for with my money. The hypocrisy was staggering. I took a deep, steadying breath. I walked into the bathroom and looked at my reflection. The red mark on my cheek was still visible, but I didn't try to cover it with makeup. I wanted them to see it. I put on my maid of honor dress, a simple, elegant gown in a pale blush color. It felt like armor. I did my hair. I put on my earrings. I looked like a woman preparing to stand beside her sister at the altar, but I wasn't. I was a woman preparing for war. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my financial advisor, giving him a very specific set of instructions. The second was to the venue manager at the museum, a woman I had corresponded with for months. I explained that there had been a change of plans regarding the final payment. I was calm, polite, and professional. She was, as I expected, completely understanding. When I hung up, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. I was no longer a victim in their drama. I was the architect of its conclusion. I would go to the wedding. I would watch my sister get married. And then, at the reception they thought I had paid for, I would give them my final answer. Not just about the penthouse, but about everything. Walking into the church felt like stepping onto a stage. The ceremony was about to begin, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies and unspoken tension. My arrival caused a ripple of whispers. I saw my Aunt Carol's eyes widen as she saw my face. The faint but definite mark on my cheek was a silent testament to the morning's events, a story that needed no words. I ignored the stairs and walked down the side aisle to the vestibule where the bridal party was gathering. My father saw me first. He was standing with Liam and the groomsmen, looking regal in his tuxedo. His face hardened when our eyes met. He strode over, grabbing my arm in a grip that was just a little too tight. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice low and furious, his eyes darting around to make sure no one could overhear. "You are going to cover that mark on your face. You are going to walk down that aisle, smile, and you are not going to say a single word about this morning. Do you understand me?" I looked at his hand on my arm and then back at his face, my expression unreadable. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice eerily calm. I pulled my arm from his grasp. "Don't touch me again." I turned and walked away, leaving him momentarily speechless. The power dynamic had shifted. He was used to issuing commands. He was not used to them being met with quiet, unshakable defiance. I found Chloe and the bridesmaids in a small side room. The lost locket had apparently been found. It had fallen into the lining of a gift bag, but the mood was anything but celebratory. Chloe was pale and her eyes were puffy, but she was in her magnificent wedding gown. She looked like a tragic princess. When she saw me, she flinched, then looked away, unable to meet my gaze. My mother was there, fussing with Chloe's veil, her back pointedly toward me. She refused to acknowledge my presence. It was the ultimate power play in her arsenal. The silent treatment. To her, I no longer existed. The wedding planner, a harried-looking woman with a clipboard, clapped her hands. "All right, everyone, it's time. Line up, please. Maid of honor, you're first." All eyes turned to me. This was the moment of truth. Would I fall in line? Would I take my place in the procession and play my part in their perfect family pageant? I gave a small, serene smile and stepped into my designated spot at the front of the line, right behind the flower girl. I could feel the collective sigh of relief from my family. They thought they had won. They mistook my compliance for surrender. They had no idea that I was simply moving my pieces into position for the final move. The organ music swelled, and the heavy church doors swung open. I walked down the aisle, my steps measured and even. I kept my head held high. my eyes focused straight ahead on the altar. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, on my face. I knew what they were thinking. What happened to her? Did she fall? Is that a bruise? I let them wonder, let them whisper. The truth would come out soon enough. As I took my place at the altar, I finally allowed myself to look at my sister. As she walked down the aisle on my father's arm, she looked both beautiful and broken. This was supposed to be her day, and I felt a genuine pang of sadness for her. But she had made her choice. When faced with the decision between standing up for what was right and siding with our parents' toxic demands, she had chosen them. She had chosen the path of least resistance, the path she had been trained to take her entire life. The ceremony itself was surreal. I stood there, a silent witness, as my sister and Liam exchanged vows. They promised to love, honor, and protect each other. I wondered if Chloe understood what those words really meant. Did protection mean shielding your partner from ugly truths? Did honor mean demanding your family members sacrifice their own peace of mind for your comfort? As they were pronounced husband and wife and the crowd erupted in applause, I clapped along with them, my smile feeling like a mask. But underneath, my resolve was hardening into something unbreakable. At the reception, held in the grand ballroom of the Dallas Museum of Art, the facade of familial harmony was in full effect. The room was breathtaking, towering floral centerpieces, crystal glasses shimmering under soft lighting, a jazz band playing softly in the corner. It was the picture of elegance and class, a wedding that would be talked about in Dallas society for months. And I had paid for almost all of it. My parents were in their element, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, acting as if the morning's ugliness had never happened. My mother even graced me with a tight, bloodless smile as I passed her, a silent command to continue the performance. I spent the first hour making my way through the crowd, accepting compliments on my dress, and fielding concerned but polite inquiries about my cheek. To each one, I gave a vague, dismissive answer. "Oh, just a clumsy moment this morning. I'm perfectly fine." I was biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment. It came after the main course was served, during the traditional speeches. My father gave a booming, self-congratulatory speech about family legacy and new beginnings. Liam's father, Charles, gave a charming and witty toast to the happy couple. Then, the MC, a friend of the family, tapped the microphone. "And now, we'd like to invite up the person who has known the bride longer than anyone, her sister and maid of honor, Ilara Vance." This was it. A hush fell over the room as I made my way to the small stage. I saw my father give me a sharp, warning look. My mother's smile was frozen on her face. Chloe looked at me with a pleading expression, her eyes begging me not to make a scene. I stepped up to the microphone, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I looked out at the sea of faces, my family, their friends, Liam's family from another continent. They were all watching me, expecting a heartfelt, sentimental speech about sisterly love and cherished memories. And I was going to give them a speech they would never forget. But it wouldn't be about the past. It would be about the future, my future, and the bill for theirs, which was about to come due. I adjusted the microphone, the metallic coolness a grounding presence under my fingertips. The ballroom was silent, 150 pairs of eyes fixed on me. I could feel my family's collective tension. They were holding their breath, praying I would stick to the script they had unknowingly written for me. I took a sip of water, looked directly at my sister Chloe, and began. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the magnificent hall. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ilara, Chloe's older sister. It's an honor to be standing here tonight on this beautiful, momentous occasion." I saw my parents relax ever so slightly. So far, so good. This was the safe, generic opening they were hoping for. Growing up, Chloe and I had what you might call a classic sisterly relationship, I continued, a gentle, nostalgic smile on my face. She was the artist, the dreamer, the one who could light up a room with her presence. I was the planner, the pragmatist, the one who preferred books to parties. We were different, but we were a unit. Our parents taught us that family is the most important thing, that you support each other, you celebrate each other's successes, and you show up for each other no matter what. I paused, letting the sentimental words hang in the air. I glanced at my mother, who was now beaming, nodding in agreement. She thought this speech was a tribute to her parenting. But as we grow up, I said, my tone shifting subtly, becoming more serious, more deliberate, we learn that the definition of support can become complicated. We learn that sometimes love and obligation can be twisted into tools of control. We learn that showing up for your family shouldn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. The smiles in the room began to falter. The atmosphere shifted from celebratory to uncertain. I could see my father's jaw tightening. He knew this was no longer the pre-approved toast. I have always been incredibly proud of the life I've built for myself. I worked hard for it. I sacrificed for it. And I believe that the fruits of that labor should be used to spread joy. That's why, when my father mentioned the stress of planning a wedding of this magnitude, I said, gesturing to the opulent room, I was more than happy to step in and help. I wanted my sister to have the fairy tale she always dreamed of. So I offered to cover the costs for this beautiful venue, for the exquisite food you've all enjoyed, for the endless champagne flowing tonight. I did this out of love, because that's what family does, right? You give, generously and without expectation. A murmur went through the crowd. This was news to most of them. They had assumed my father was footing the entire bill. I saw Chloe's face drain of color. She was starting to understand where this was going. Liam looked utterly confused, glancing between Chloe and me. But a gift is only a gift when it is given freely and received with gratitude, I stated, my voice losing all its warmth and taking on a sharp, clear edge. It is not a down payment on a person's soul. It is not a license to demand more, to disrespect, to cross fundamental boundaries of human decency. A six-figure contribution to a wedding does not, for example, give you the right to demand ownership of a person's home. And it certainly does not give you the right to physically assault them when they refuse. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. My words hung in the air, shocking and undeniable. I lightly touched the still tender skin on my cheek. This morning, when I once again refused to hand over the keys to my penthouse so my parents could use it to impress their new in-laws, my mother slapped me across the face. The room erupted in frantic whispers. My mother looked like she had turned to stone, her face a mask of pure horror and humiliation. My father half rose from his chair, his face purple with rage. Chloe burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. Liam's parents, Charles and Isabel, looked utterly appalled, their polite English facades crumbling to reveal pure shock. I was told to cover this mark on my face, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound power. I was told to come here and smile and pretend it didn't happen. I was told not to ruin my sister's perfect day. But I've realized something. True perfection isn't about hiding the ugly truth. It's about having the courage to speak it. The truth is, my support, my generosity, and my love have been taken for granted for the last time. I picked up my champagne flute from the lectern. So, I would like to propose a toast. Not to the happy couple, but to a new beginning. My new beginning. A future where my worth is not determined by what I can provide to others, but by the respect I command for myself. I raised my glass, and in the spirit of this new beginning, I have one final wedding gift. As of 9:45 p.m. this evening, I instructed my financial advisor to issue a stop payment on the final check for all of tonight's festivities. The payment was due in 15 minutes. But don't worry, I said, looking directly at my stunned father. I had the venue manager and the catering director draw up new invoices. They're right here. I reached under the lectern and produced a crisp manila folder. They're addressed to you, Dad. I believe the outstanding balance is somewhere in the neighborhood of $175,000. Congratulations. The wedding you wanted is now officially all yours. I placed the folder on the lectern with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I looked at Chloe's weeping face, my mother's utter devastation, and my father's apoplectic rage. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt free. "Thank you all for your time," I said into the microphone. "Please, enjoy the rest of the evening." And with that, I turned, stepped off the stage, and walked out of the ballroom without looking back, leaving behind the smoldering wreckage of a fairy tale I had paid for, and a family I no longer recognized as my own. The moment the heavy ballroom doors closed behind me, the suffocating silence was replaced by the muffled sound of chaos. I could hear a crescendo of voices, a chair scraping loudly, and what sounded like my sister's heartbroken sobs. I didn't stop. I walked with a steady, determined pace through the marble lobby of the museum, past a stunned-looking security guard, and out into the cool Dallas night. The air felt clean, fresh. It was the first clean breath I felt I'd taken in a week. I had my car service app open before I even reached the curb. As I waited for my ride, my phone, which I had put on silent before my speech, began to vibrate uncontrollably in my hand. It was a relentless, buzzing fury. I glanced at the screen. 37 missed calls. A flood of text messages. They were from my father, my mother, Chloe, my aunt, and even a few of my parents' friends. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. They would be a torrent of rage, disbelief, and accusations. "How could you do this? You've ruined us. You've humiliated this family." The black sedan pulled up, and I slid into the back seat, the leather cool against my skin. "The Melrose Hotel, please," I said to the driver. As the car pulled away from the curb, I allowed myself one last look at the museum. The grand, illuminated facade looked like a movie set, a place where a beautiful story was supposed to have happened. Inside, I knew a very different movie was playing out, a disaster film. Once the car was moving smoothly through the city streets, I finally opened the texts. My father's were short, brutal, and filled with typos, a testament to his rage. "You are no daughter of mine. Answer your phone now. You will regret this for the rest of your life." My mother's were a stream of consciousness of victimhood and despair. "My heart is broken. Our reputation is ruined." Charles and Isabel looked at me with such pity. How could my own child be so cruel? "You did this to me. You did this to your sister." But it was Chloe's message that gave me a moment's pause. It was just one sentence. "You destroyed my life." For a second, a flicker of the old guilt, the old programming of the responsible older sister, sparked within me. Had I gone too far? Had I taken her happiest day and turned it into her worst? Then I looked at the faint bruise that was now purpling on my cheek in the reflection of the car window. The slap. The demands. The lifetime of being invisible? No, I hadn't destroyed her life. I had simply stopped allowing them to destroy mine. Her life, and the consequences of her choices and our parents' actions, were now her own to manage. I did something I had never done before. I blocked my father's number, then my mother's, then Chloe's. One by one, I digitally severed the ties. It felt like cutting off a gangrenous limb. Painful, terrifying, but absolutely necessary for survival. I left my aunt's number unblocked, knowing she was the family's designated messenger. If there was a real emergency, she would be the one to call. When I got back to my hotel room, I called Marcus. "It's done," I said, sinking into an armchair. I told him everything that had happened, every word of my speech, the look on my parents' faces. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Wow," he finally said. "That wasn't just dropping a bomb. That was a strategic, targeted nuclear strike. How do you feel?" "Empty," I admitted, "and strangely calm, like I've just survived a hurricane." "You did," he said. "A hurricane named Vance. I'm proud of you, Laura. I know that was the hardest thing you've ever had to do." We talked for another hour, and his calm, validating presence was the anchor I needed. While we were on the phone, a call from an unknown number came through. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message appeared. It was from Liam. His voice was strained and full of a weary sadness. Ilara, I don't know what to say. This is an absolute nightmare. Chloe is inconsolable. Your parents are in a meeting with the venue manager. My parents are, well, they're deeply concerned. I need to understand. Why would you do it like that? So publicly? I thought about his question. Why not just quietly cancel the check? Why the public speech? I texted him back. Because for 30 years, my family's problems and my contributions have been kept in private. I decided it was time to bring them into the light. Tell Chloe I truly hope she'll be happy. But my relationship with our family is over. I spent the rest of the night packing. I had an early flight back to Seattle, back to my life, back to my sanctuary. As I folded my maid of honor dress and placed it in my suitcase, I realized I was leaving more than just a dress behind. I was leaving behind the girl who would do anything for her family's approval. The girl who accepted disrespect as the price of admission. The girl who believed that love was something you had to earn through endless sacrifice. My aunt called just before I fell asleep. Her voice was surprisingly gentle. Alara, your father. He had to call his broker. He's liquidating some stock to cover the bill. They're furious. But I wanted you to know what you said up there. It was shocking, but it wasn't untrue. It was the closest thing to validation I would get from anyone in my family, and it was more than I ever expected. The fallout was just beginning. Reputations in their tight-knit social circle would be shattered. Relationships would be permanently altered. My sister's marriage was starting under the shadow of a financial and emotional mushroom cloud. It was a messy, painful, ugly ending. But for me, it was also a beginning. As I drifted off to sleep, for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about what my family thought of me, because they were no longer the arbiters of my worth. I was. 6 months. That's how long it's been since I walked out of that ballroom and into my new life. The first few weeks back in Seattle were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The silence from my family was a tangible thing. A void where there used to be a constant hum of expectation and low-grade anxiety. For the first time in my adult life, no one was asking me for anything. No one was subtly guilting me or passively aggressively commenting on my life choices. There was just peace. And in that peace, I began to heal. I threw myself into my work, but with a new perspective. I was no longer working to prove something, no longer building a fortress against the world. I was working because I loved it, because the complex puzzles of data and logic brought me a sense of order and satisfaction. I started leaving the office at a reasonable hour. I explored the city I lived in but had never truly seen. I went hiking on weekends, breathing in the crisp mountain air. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. I started dating again. I was, for the first time, the main character in my own story, not a supporting role in someone else's. My penthouse, the source of so much conflict, transformed back into my sanctuary. It was no longer a symbol of defiance, but a place of genuine comfort and joy. I'd sit in my living room, watching the sunset paint the sky over the Puget Sound, and feel a sense of profound gratitude, not for the money that bought the view, but for the strength it had taken to protect it, and myself. I learned about the aftermath in Dallas through a slow trickle of information, mostly from my Aunt Carol, who had appointed herself the neutral diplomat in our family's Cold War. The stories she told were of a family completely undone by the public exposure of their private dysfunction. The fallout from the wedding was immediate and brutal. My father, a man obsessed with his reputation, became a pariah at the country club. The story of what happened had spread like wildfire, and the version that caught on was not flattering to him or my mother. They were seen as greedy, entitled, and worst of all, they had lost control. My father was forced to sell a significant portion of his stock portfolio at an inopportune time to cover the wedding bill, a financial hit that I know wounded his pride far more than his bank account. My mother, according to my aunt, took to her bed for 2 weeks, refusing to see anyone. Her social circle, once a source of strength, was now a source of shame. The pitying looks and whispered conversations were too much for her to bear. She had built her entire identity on the foundation of a perfect family, and I had taken a sledgehammer to it. The saddest story was Chloe's. Her fairy tale wedding had become a cautionary tale. She and Liam had gone on their honeymoon, but they returned to a mountain of debt and a family in turmoil. Liam's parents, while publicly supportive, were privately horrified. They had been drawn into a vortex of vulgar drama they wanted no part of. The pressure on the newlyweds was immense. Chloe, who had never had to deal with real-world consequences, was suddenly drowning in them. She had to sell the new luxury SUV my parents had bought her as a wedding gift. She and Liam had to downsize their dream home before they even moved in. They were fighting constantly, not about normal newlywed things, but about the financial and emotional crater I had left behind. About 3 months ago, I received an email with a subject line that simply said, "I'm sorry." It was from Liam. He wrote that it had taken him months to understand what had really happened. He said that living with Chloe and seeing my parents' behavior up close, without the filter of courtship, had opened his eyes. He said he finally understood that the fight wasn't about a penthouse, but about a lifetime of disrespect. He apologized for not seeing it sooner, for being a bystander. He ended the email by saying that he and Chloe were in counseling, trying to build a marriage on a foundation that wasn't made of our parents' expectations. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted me to know that he understood. It was a moment of grace I hadn't expected. I never heard from my father. I suspect I never will. His pride is a fortress even more formidable than my penthouse. My mother sent a single Hallmark-style birthday card last month. Inside, she had written, "Hoping you are well." There was no apology, no acknowledgement, but for her, it was a white flag, a tiny crack in the wall of her anger. I haven't responded. I don't know if I ever will. Some relationships aren't meant to be mended. They're meant to be outgrown. 2 weeks ago, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Chloe. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual bubbly confidence. She told me she had gotten a new job, a real one, that she had found on her own. She said she and Liam were still in counseling and it was hard, but they were trying. Then she said the words I never thought I would hear from her. "I get it now, Laura," she said, her voice cracking. "All those years, you were just on your own. I never saw it. I'm sorry I never saw it." It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was real. "Thank you for saying that, Chloe," I replied. "I hope you'll be okay." "I think we will be," she said. "Maybe someday. We can be sisters again." "Maybe," I said, and I meant it. Maybe. Someday. The lesson in all of this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. When I stood on that stage, I thought I was ending a war, but I was actually starting a painful, necessary process of rebuilding. Not rebuilding my family, but rebuilding myself. I learned that boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are lines that teach people where the door is and how to knock politely. I learned that your worth is not a negotiation. You don't have to justify it. And you certainly don't have to let the people who are supposed to love you the most devalue it. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and even for your family, is to walk away, to give them the space, to see who they are without you there to fix it, to pay for it, to absorb it. And in that space, maybe, just maybe, they can finally begin to see you, too. If you've ever had to make a hard choice to protect your own peace, if you've ever had to redefine what family means to you, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments below. What did you learn from it? If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe, because every one of us has a story about finding our own strength. Thank you for listening to mine. And may you always have the courage to protect your own sanctuary, whatever and wherever it may be.